Lucas, managing editor of the Knitting Circle, and I want to welcome you to today's Facebook Live. In this video today, we're going to be making something fun, and it's something that's super beginner friendly. So if you are a new knitter, I'm really excited to go through this with you today. And that's this slip stitch dishcloth. And I actually have two here. This one I made out of a variegated yarn, and then this one I did just out of a plain solid yarn. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as I'm working through this. So even if you're not a beginner, this is a really fun stitch pattern to do. And these dishcloths really didn't take me any time. I think I knit both of these in the same day, actually. So even if you're an intermediate or an advanced knitter, stay tuned because I'm sure that you will enjoy knitting these too. But I'm trying to bring you guys a good mix of projects as far as skill levels go. So this time we're going to do something that is definitely beginner friendly. I actually told my mom, who sometimes watches these Facebook videos and doesn't knit, I was like, Mom, you should check this out today because maybe you could learn to knit from my video, and then knitting could be your hobby too. So anyway, let's go ahead and get started. If you haven't already done so, you're going to want to download the pattern that is in the description of where you're watching this video, and then you will get the actual PDF download of the pattern so that you can follow along with me now, and then when the video's over, you can make one for yourself. Also, be sure to drop in the comments section a hello, let us know where you're watching from. Even let us know maybe how long you've been knitting, especially since we're starting with a more, beginner-friendly project today. I'd love to know how long all of you have been knitting. And if you have any questions along the way, be sure to drop those in the comments as well, and we will get to as many as we can. And if you are watching something here and you find it a little bit confusing and you're like, oh, I want to watch this again, don't worry. The videos do go back up on our website after the live, so you'll be able to go back and rewatch the video to watch any parts that you might find tricky, or if you just want to watch it again. So I'm going to go ahead and flip to my other camera so you can see my hands, and we're going to get started knitting. So first we're going to talk about the supplies. Here we go. So we don't really need too many supplies for this particular project. So what we're going to need is 70 yards of a worsted weight yarn. And in particular in this pattern, I listed a dishcloth cotton yarn. So here I just have some leftovers from another dishcloth here that I'm just going to use today as I'm knitting along. But here's another one. You can get this yarn just at your big box craft store. Even just a lot of regular big box stores, not even craft stores, do carry this type of yarn. Here's another one that I bought online that's a solid. And this particular one, I still had the label on, so I wanted to take a look at it. And here you can see, well, I'll also read it in case you can't see it. That is 190 yards in this particular ball of dishcloth cotton. And so you only need 70 yards to complete one of these. So if you're buying one ball of one of these, you can get typically two out of them. And what a lot of people actually will do is they might start another dishcloth, and if they run out of yarn, they just grab another ball and start knitting with the next color because it's a dishcloth. So you have lots of options here. I'm going to just do it in the solid blue because I think it's a little bit easier to see on camera. But the variegated, you can see here in my sample, it's so pretty. Like with the slip stitches that we're going to be doing, it just makes a really nice little pattern. And it's just only 4 rows that we're repeating, but you can really see that texture of that stitch. Really great for a dishcloth. You could use this as a washcloth for your face too, if you want. A lot of people do like to make these cotton dishcloths as face cloths as well. So in addition to our 70 yards of yarn, we also need some knitting needles. So you need a US size 7, which is 4.5 millimeter knitting needle. So I have straight needles here, which is what, if you're new to knitting, this is what you think of when you think of knitting needles, but I actually like to use a circular needle, and I use a circular needle for all my knitting, whether I'm knitting straight back and forth in rows like we're doing here today, or I'm knitting in the round, obviously. So I'm going to use my circular needles just because that's what I like to knit with, but you can use a circular or you can use a straight needle. In addition to that, we just are going to need a tapestry needle. Here I just have a bent tip one. I just, have a ton of these in my Knitting Notions box. So we'll need one of those to weave in our ends, pair of scissors to cut our yarn. And then this is optional, but if you're a beginner, I do definitely recommend having a locking stitch marker. And even if you're not a beginner, you might find this helpful. Here we can see, I'll bring the green one out here. Here we have the front side of the dishcloth, and here's the back. So they do look different. So you can tell the right side from the wrong side, but you might find it, and as we're going along, I'll put one on my sample too. I like to mark just the right side of my work as I'm going along, because especially when I go ahead and put my knitting down and then pick it back up later, this will help us to know which side we left off on. So those are all the supplies we're going to need. I can see some people are saying hello. Monique says that they've been knitting for decades, and Lori is watching from Eden Prairie, Minnesota, and only been knitting for 7 years. Well, welcome to both of you. I'm glad that you're here to watch. Okay, so let's get started. So for this particular pattern, we're going to start by casting on 35 stitches, and I'm not going to cast on the full 35 here. I'm going to cast on a smaller number. But for this particular stitch pattern, you need to have a multiple of 4 stitches plus an extra 3 on the needle to do this stitch pattern with the little borders on the side. So for the dishcloth, we have 35 stitches, so that's 4 times 8 is 32, plus 3 is 35, so that's where 35 came from. For my little sample, I'm just going to do 19 stitches, because 4 times 4 is 16, plus 3 is 19. So I wanted to talk about that math quickly, because if you like this stitch pattern and you want to make a bigger one, or you want to make a smaller one, you can do that. You just need a multiple of 4 stitches plus an extra 3, and then you can just follow the instructions as written and then knit it to the size that you want. Just keep in mind, obviously, if you're changing the stitch count, that you are going to be changing the amount of yarn that you need. So just a little warning there. I also just wanted to talk about the stitch count briefly, because I did want to talk about gauge. So the gauge is listed in the pattern as 20 stitches and 32 rows equals 4 inches in our pattern stitch, so our center stitch here. And so that works out to 5 stitches per inch and 8 rows per inch. Now, obviously, this is a dishcloth. Are you really going to knit a gauge swatch when you're making a dishcloth? I feel like your gauge swatch just is the dishcloth. So I know that most people are not going to be checking their gauge to make sure that it's matching my 5 stitches per inch. So if you're not doing that, which is fine, because I wouldn't knit a gauge swatch for a dishcloth either, I just wanted you to have those stitch counts of the multiple of 4 plus 3, so that if yours is coming out a little bit smaller, yours is coming out a little bit bigger, you can sort of adjust, you can start over and adjust the size of your dishcloth so it's the size that you want. So that's enough math, I think. So let's move on. We have a few more people saying hi. Kathy is watching from Virginia and has been knitting for over 50 years. Annette just starting today from Arizona. I did it in high school, but haven't done it since. Well, welcome, Annette. That's awesome. And Mary says that Mary's watching from Chicago. Oh, I'm in the suburbs of Chicago right now. And Mary's been knitting for over 40 years and loves the knitting circle. Well, welcome. Okay, so great. I'm glad that you're all here. So let's go ahead and cast on. So to cast on, I used a long tail cast on for this, and that's what I wrote specifically out in the pattern, because I did want this to be a beginner friendly pattern. I did list the specific cast on, but really it's a dishcloth. Use whatever cast on you want. I'm going to do the long tail. So for the long tail cast on, because we need a long tail, I'm going to start by estimating this tail. And I've probably talked about this in other live videos. I'm sure I have, but I always want to show it, because it's such a great little hack to use when you're trying to estimate the tail. So I'm going to first just start with a little bit of a tail here that I will weave in later. And then I'm going to wrap the yarn around my needle 10 times. So that's 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so that's 10. So I would say, okay, This is 10 stitches. If I was going to my 35, see, I fold it over, that makes 20 stitches. Fold it over again. We're going to estimate that would take 30 stitches. And then if we were doing 35, honestly, I'd probably just fold it over a fourth time to say 40. It's always better to then estimate a little bit more than what you need. So let's see. Like that's about 10. I'm going to do 16. So I'm just going to fold it over like twice like that. And then we're going to make our slip knot. So I've made my little loop here and I'm folding my loop over the yarn tail and putting my loop onto the needle. We have another person saying hello. Judy's watching from Fort Wayne and has been knitting since high school, but only easy stitches. So this video will help me bone up to slipping stitches. Yes, we'll be slipping lots of stitches today. Okay, so now I have my one stitch on the needle. Our slip knot counts as a stitch. And now I'm going to start the long tail cast on. So my working yarn, and that's, I kind of have a little mess of yarn here, but the working yarn is the yarn that's going to my ball of yarn. And then I have my long tail. Okay, so the long tail is going over my thumb, and then my working yarn is going over my pointer finger. So I've made a V like this. We also have a free video on the Knitting Circle website where I show you how to do the long tail cast on. So you can also go check that out too if you watch this and you still find it a little confusing. So now to do the long tail, we're just going to go through the loop on our thumb, around the yarn on our index finger, and back through the loop and drop the loop on our thumb. And we've cast on another stitch. And then we're going to go through the loop on our thumb, around the yarn on our index finger, back through the loop, drop the loop on our thumb. And so I will just keep doing this. And again, the pattern calls for 35 stitches. I'm just going to do 19 here. Let's see, we have Tacey saying hi from near Seattle. Been trying for perfection, rip out more than I knit, LOL. Isn't that the truth? I'm somebody that actually doesn't like to rip out a lot when I knit. I always will try to fix my mistakes. Sometimes that's not possible though, or I just fudge it and make it right. But I personally stopped striving for perfection by knitting a long time ago. I just want to enjoy my hobby, you know. Okay, let's see how many we have. I was talking, so I wasn't counting. 2, 5, 7, 10, 12, 14, okay, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19. So you could see here, I had estimated for 20 stitches. So I have, that's a little bit of a longer tail, but hey, better to have too much of a tail than not enough. So again, for the dishcloth, you're going to have 35. So now I'm going to knit one row on the wrong side. This is just like a little setup row. And when you do the long tail cast on, that technically makes a right side row of knitting, or like if you're working in stockinette, it kind of makes a right side row. So most patterns, after you've done a long tail cast on, your next row is going to be a wrong side row. That's not always the case. Obviously, it depends on the designer and the look that they're going for. But most of the time after a long tail cast on, your next row is going to be a wrong side. So our wrong side, we're just knitting. We're just making a teeny tiny little garter stitch border here. So that's that. And I'm knitting with the yarn in my right hand. That's just how I knit. But just keep in mind, if you're somebody that knits continental and you have the yarn in your left hand, I'm not going to do it here on the video because I can do it, but I'm very slow. But just know that it's exactly the same. You're going to knit your stitches how you would knit them. If you're holding the yarn in your left hand, you'll slip them how you would slip them. The only thing is if you're a truly left-handed knitter and you knit truly in the mirror image, obviously you're going to have to reverse everything I'm doing. But most of you are probably either knitting just with the yarn in your right hand or knitting with the yarn in your left hand and making stitches in the same way. But I always want to point that out just because I know it can sometimes confuse people a little bit. Okay, so now that we've done that, we are going to put our stitch marker on our right side. So I'm just going to take my little stitch marker here, and I'm just going to loop it through one of these stitches. And I can move this up as I go if I want to, as I have more fabric, but we're just going to put it on right away. Again, this is optional. It's just so that I know which side is my right side when I inevitably go, you know, set this down so I can go refill my coffee cup or whatever. Okay, so now we're going to start with our first right side row. This is row 1. We're going to knit 3. Then we are going to slip one with yarn and back, knit 3, and we're going to repeat that to the end. So slip one with yarn and back. We are going to slip one purlwise because the abbreviations tell us that slip means to slip a stitch purlwise. And the general rule of thumb is that you always slip a stitch. Well, I don't really want to say always, but I'm going to. The general rule is you always slip a stitch purlwise unless the pattern tells you otherwise. So, and I believe in the abbreviations of this, I said it was slip stitch purlwise. Anyway, so we're going to go into that stitch like we're going to purl, and just all we're doing is basically transferring it from the left needle to the right needle. And we had a WYIB, so with yarn and back, we were already knitting, so our yarn is in the back. So we're just slipping one with the yarn in the back. Then we're going to knit 3. Then we're going to slip one purlwise with yarn and back. You can see how easy this is. We're really just moving that stitch is all we're doing. And our yarn's already in the back. So this row's super simple. All the rows are super simple. 1, 2, 3. And we're doing that all the way to the end. So we have 4 stitches left. So we're going to slip one and then knit 3. So that's row 1. So now for row 2, I'm going to turn it back around so that my free needle's in my right hand. And we're going to knit 3. And then now we're going to slip one with yarn in front, WYIF, slip one with yarn in front, and then knit 3. So our yarn's in the back because we were knitting. So we're going to bring our yarn in between the needles to the front, slip our stitch purlwise because we're always slipping our stitch purlwise, and then knitting 3. So then we have to move our yarn to the back and knit 3. Slip one with yarn in front. We're bringing our yarn to the front. Slip, then knit 3. See, Nathalie is saying bonjour from Montreal. I'm so glad that you can join us. We love having international visitors on our lives. We love knitting in all parts of the world, right? So we're just going to keep doing our slip with the yarn in front. And knit 3. So that's rows 1 and 2. So now let's do rows 3 and 4. So for row 3, we're going to start with a knit 1. And then we are going to slip one with yarn and back. So our yarn, again, we're on the right side. So our yarn is already in the back because we've been knitting. So we're going to slip, knit 3. We're going to keep doing that until we have 2 stitches left. So we're going to just continue that. Slip one with yarn in back, knit 3. Slip one with yarn in back, knit 3. I'm going to do these 2 rows and then we're going to talk some more about some slip stitches. So we're just finishing up row 3 here. So we're repeating that till we have 2 stitches left. Slip one with yarn in back, knit 1. So that's row 3. And then flipping it around to row 4. We do a knit 1 and then slip one with yarn in front, knit 3. So you can see that the right side rows and the wrong side rows are very similar, but rows 1 and 2, we're starting with a knit 3, and rows 3 and 4, we're starting with a knit 1. And the reason being is we're just trying to offset, well, we're not trying, we are offsetting the slip stitches. So I'll show you what I mean here. Let's finish up row 4. We'll finish it up with a slip 1 with yarn in front, knit 1. So let me just bring in this here. So if we take a look at my finished one, so you can see these little V's, Let me stick my needle under it. That's a slip stitch. And you can see we have a slip stitch here and then over here and over here and over here. So you can see how they're offset like that. And that's why there's 4 rows of knitting and not 2 rows, because if we just repeated rows 1 and 2, you would just have slip stitches all stacked on top of each other, which can also be a very nice pattern, but we want them offset like this. So the other thing is I want to work through maybe 2, maybe 4 more rows of this, just to talk a little bit about the slipping with the yarn in the front and the yarn in the back, because that's something that can sometimes confuse people. And it confused me too, honestly, when I was first learning about slip stitches. Just like the long tail cast on, we do have a video on the Knitting Circle for slipping stitches. We have videos on just slipping stitches, and I specifically did a video on slipping stitches with the yarn in front and the yarn in back like we're doing here. So if you're finding this confusing, definitely go check that video out too. So you can, you know, get a little bit more information about this. So let's work row 1 again. So once we've worked rows 1 through 4, you're going to just keep repeating rows 1 through 4 another 12 times. That's what's indicated in the pattern. But let's go ahead and just work a couple more rows here so we can talk more about slip stitches. So we're on row 1 again. So we have knit 3. Okay, slip 1 with yarn in back. Okay, so this, it's kind of obvious. We're on the right side, okay? But front and back, when we're talking about slipping stitches, front and back, unless the designer specifies otherwise, in general, the rule is front and back refer to the way that you are looking at your knitting. It does not refer to right side or wrong side. Again, maybe a designer has written that into their pattern and hopefully they have, you know, described in detail what you're supposed to do. But in general, the rule is with yarn in front and with yarn in back, is front and back refer to how you are looking at your knitting when you are looking down at it working, not on whether you're on the right side or wrong side. So here we're on the right side, it's with yarn in back. So we just want to make sure we're keeping our yarn in the back. Okay, so we knit our 3, we're slipping with the yarn in the back. And then slipping, knitting 3. And we're just going to keep working that all the way down. Again, this is row 1. And we are ending with the knit 3. Okay, so let's do row 2 again. And this is where the yarn in front, yarn in back sometimes gets a little confusing. And I know it confused me too at first. So we're doing row 2 of the pattern now. And so we're going to knit 3. And now it says to slip 1 with yarn in front. Okay, so this is where it gets a little confusing to some people, including myself at first, because you think front, oh, well, this is the front, the right side is the front, but with yarn in front and yarn in back is not referring to right side, wrong side. So we have our wrong side facing and we want to slip 1 with yarn in front. So we need to bring the yarn to the front as we are looking at it. So it's in the front. So you can see here, I'm going to just knit my next 3 stitches and then, so that way I've anchored in that slip stitch in the yarn. Okay. So here we have where we slipped our stitch, this one, because we knit 3, and then we slipped 1 here, and then we knit 3 more. So if we take a look here, and it's a little hard to see, but you'll see this when you knit your own, is that we have these little vertical, these aren't vertical, these are horizontal. We have these horizontal bars here. And this is where the yarn, when we slip the stitch, this bottom one here, that's where we slipped and the yarn was in the back. We were on this side, and so we slipped, and so the yarn was in the back. And now on the front, we just knit 3, brought the yarn to the front and slipped. That's this little bar here. So what we're doing is we're having that yarn sort of get carried over to the next stitch, and we want to keep those little floats in the wrong side of our work so that on the right side of our work, we can see those nice slip stitches, which are these nice sort of elongated V's here. So let's see, we have a few more little comments. Let me just take a pause for a second. Oh, Tacey says you're a great teacher. Thank you. Well, thank you so much. That's so nice. I'm glad that you're enjoying this. Mary says that the Knitting Circle has great videos, very helpful and great resource when needed. Thank you so much, Mary. I was just talking with our behind the scenes person before we started this, and I was saying about how, you know, we really do have a really good library of videos on how to describe how to do sort of your basics and most of the things you're going to find in many knitting patterns. And so it's really great because a lot of times when I am doing these types of videos or other people are doing these types of videos, we can refer back to some of our other content if you need a little bit more help. And let's see. Oh, we have Ursula, who is also in Canada. Ursula is in Burlington, Ontario, Canada, and is a beginner knitter. So thank you so much for joining us, Ursula. I'm so glad that you're here. And I know we do have a couple of beginners here. And so, you know, talking about resources that we have on the Knitting Circle website, we do have a 14-day Learn to Knit series that is free, where I go through a lot of the stuff you're seeing here today, casting on, knitting, and there's some projects too involved in that. So if you want to know a little bit more about knitting, you can check that out on our website. Okay, so we're finishing up row 2. So we did our knit 3, slip with the yarn in front, knit 3. So we're on a slip with the yarn in front here, and then knit 3. So we're going to just keep working that row 2. And so again, you would just keep working the pattern. You're going to repeat rows 1 through 4 another 12 times, and then you're going to do rows 1 and 2 once more. And that's just to make our stitch pattern nice and centered on our fabric. So I'm just finishing a row 2. So we're going to pretend now that I've done all of my rows. So you would just keep continuing that pattern. And here, let me find my pointer needle here. Here we go. Let me just hold that up just a hair. Okay. So here you can see our slip stitch here, and then this one here is slipped, but it's still slipped and on the needle. So we can, we'll be knitting it and then it'll look elongated on the next row. Let's see. Oh, Jenny says, this is so helpful, can use now on a shawl project. And Jenny is from Tennessee. Well, welcome, Jenny. Yeah, I love doing these slip stitches on a shawl. And actually, I think I can, let me see if I can reach it from where I'm sitting, since we're talking about, if you enjoy slip stitches, I'm just going to bring this out real quick before we finish it up. We actually have a free pattern on our website. This is a shawl I did last year for the Knitting Circle, and it's a free pattern. We did a challenge. It was actually a mystery shawl, but you know, it's not a mystery anymore. It was a year ago. But it does incorporate these slip stitches into the stitch pattern, and it's repeated down here as well. So if you're enjoying this process of the slip stitches and you're looking for something that's a little bit more of a challenge, especially because we do have some people here that have been knitting longer, be sure to go to our website and look for the shawl pattern, because that was so fun to knit. Let's see. Oh, Lori says, love your knitting tutorials. I have been knitting for many years, but I mostly taught myself, and Lori's from Connecticut. That's great, Lori. I'm glad you love our tutorials. I mostly taught myself too. I actually learned out of a book that was called Learn to Knit in Just One Day. It took me longer than one day. Well, it took me one day to learn how to knit. It took me a few days to learn how to purl. That one was tricky for me for some reason. Okay, so now, let's see. Oh, Monique wants to know, what is the name of that shawl pattern? It is very pretty. It's called Amaryllis. I'm not going to try to spell that for you off the top of my head. I believe if you go to, I'm going to just check here really quickly before we bind off. If you go, I believe it's on our free patterns page on the Knitting Circle website. Let's just really quick. If it's not there, we'll make sure to drop a link. Yeah, we'll drop a link to it maybe in the comments, because we do have a, it is on our website. It's just not on our free pattern page yet. So anyway, yes, Amaryllis, but that one is available. And yeah, the slip stitches are so fun. And if anything you've gotten as far as learning about slip stitches in this video will work for that shawl as well. Okay, so again, you're going to just keep repeating your pattern for the amount of times that the directions said, and then we're going to end on row 2. So now we're going to just work the ending border, and we're going to do that by just knitting 2 rows. So since we started by casting on and then knitting 1 row on the wrong side, I'm just trying to mimic that here at the top. And again, obviously I have just this short little swatch, but we're just talking about the top edge up here that we're finishing up now. So you would just knit across, nice and easy. I do have a knot in my yarn, but you know, this is just a little swatch. I'm just gonna knit right over that. The joy of live television, right? Okay. So we did one row knit, we're going to flip it over and then knit the other row, and then we're going to bind off. And I'm going to show you a little trick for when I'm binding projects like this off, just to make my bind off look a little bit neater. So I'm just going to do a regular old traditional knitwise bind off here. Again, it's probably the first bind off you're going to learn when you first start knitting, but you can really use whatever bind off you like. But I find with a dishcloth or washcloth that just the regular old bind off that everybody learns is fine. So to do that bind off, we're going to knit one stitch and then knit a second stitch. And then we're going to pass the first stitch over the second to bind it off. So we bound off one stitch. And then you just continue by knitting one more. So you're going to have two on the right needle, pass the first over the second, knit one, pass the first over the second. And I'm just going to keep doing that until we have two stitches left. So we're just going to keep working down the row. Let me get a little more yarn there. So we're just working down our row, binding off. So you can see here, I have my stitches bound off. Keep going. All right, getting to the end here. I don't know about you, but this can sometimes be my favorite part of the project because then I know I can move on to the next project. All right, so I'm just doing that regular knitwise bind off, but when I have two stitches left, you can keep doing that bind off until you're all the way to the end and just have your one left. But when I have two left, I actually take the last two stitches and knit those two together and then pass the first over the second to finish it off. And what it does is it makes this end here just a little bit tighter and a little bit neater. And so I like to work that bind off, just the knitwise bind off until there's two stitches left on the left needle, knit those two stitches together, then pass the first over the second. So I just have one loop left. And now we are ready to cut our yarn. So we just want to leave a tail that is, 6 to 8 inches, enough to weave it in. I never really measure that. I just approximate. And then you can do one of two things. You can either bring the loop through like this to tie it off, or with this particular bind off, you actually can just pull the yarn all the way through like that. And so that just also takes a little less bulk out of that final stitch by just pulling the loop through. Now that pulling the loop through like that is not going to work for every single bind off that you do. So just a word of warning. So you can either, like I said, bring the yarn through the loop, or you can just pull the loop out. For this bind off, you pulling the loop out is fine, but there are some bind offs where that might cause some problems for you, but we're not getting into that today. So anyway, so now you would have your finished dishcloth here. And so let's talk about weaving in ends. Since, I did label this as a beginner friendly project, I do want to talk about weaving in ends. A lot of times in these videos, that's something we just say, oh, weave in your ends, but let's actually do it on this one today. So when you're weaving in your ends, we're going to use our yarn needle here. You can, I actually have another one over here. Let's see. So this one here is a straight tipped needle, and this is a bent tip. Both are great to use. But for some reason, I just like the bent tip more. So that's the one I'm going to use. So I'm going to flip this over to the wrong side, because typically you are going to want to weave in your ends on the wrong side of your work. You don't have to, it's your dishcloth, and it's a dishcloth, but typically you are going to want to weave in your ends on the wrong side. So to get my yarn onto the tapestry needle or yarn needle, I like to fold the yarn over the eye and then pinch it and then stick it through the eye like that. I just find for most yarns, that's the easiest way to get my yarn on. And then all we're going to do is just take this end, and we're on the wrong side. I'm just going to work it down through a stitch, and I might tug this just a hair, just so that I'm making sure that this edge here is staying nice and neat and I'm not pulling too tight. And then I'm just gonna work my yarn through some of the stitches. And so you wanna just sort of follow your line of stitches, but also maybe come down a row. You know, you wanna make it hard for that end to come out. That's what you have to think about, is you don't wanna only weave in a couple little stitches and cut it, because it's way more likely to come out. So there we go. You can weave it in however you like, and however many stitches you like, but I would just make sure you're doing maybe an inch or two at least of yarn woven in. And then we are going to just trim it, and you're just going to trim it as close to your fabric as you can without cutting it, hopefully. And then I just give it a little pull to kind of get that end just to go a little bit into my fabric. And let's just repeat that again for the other side. Let's see. Janet would love to see a tutorial for fingerless gloves. Well, you're in luck, because I am adding that to my list for later this year. So we definitely are going to do that. I love to knit those. So that will definitely be a project we'll be doing later this year here in these Facebook Lives. And Monique says, great tip on the bind off. Thank you. That was a tip. The bind off tip was actually something I learned when I started working for the Knitting Circle. We had another designer, Jill Wright, and she had done a video about tips for bind offs. And she actually shared that tip, and I started using it ever since, and it really does make a difference. It's really a really nice little finish to your knitting. And that's the thing, is knitting needs to just make you happy, but as you get further sort of down the rabbit hole of it, you'll find yourself wanting to improve your knitting. How can you make your fabric look better? How can you make your project look better? That's one of those things. You absolutely do not have to do it, and I did not do it you know, for a long time, but since I learned that little tip, I've been doing that, knit two together at the end. There's always something new to learn. Let's see. Nathalie says, so weaving in 5 to 6 times is enough. Usually I do a lot more. You know, it kind of, for me, depends on the project. For a washcloth, for me personally, I'm less concerned about if my end comes out, because it's a washcloth. So yeah, I just would do a little bit on this, but that's my personal preference. But if I'm doing something like a sweater or, you know, a shawl, I might weave my ends in more. And especially now we're going to talk about weaving in ends. Especially if it's something that I have to block. This was something that actually, a question that came up in our Facebook group recently about weaving in ends and blocking. So if you don't know, blocking is when you're basically washing your piece, you're getting it wet, and then you're pinning it out, stretching it and pinning it out to shape. With something like a cotton dishcloth, that's pointless in my opinion. But if you're doing it like a wool shawl or something like that, you're going to want to block it. So something like that, I do weave in my ends a lot more. And then also I weave in my ends, leave still a tail of a couple inches hanging out of like on my shawl. Then I block it. Because when you block it, what's going to happen, you stretch it, the end is going to start getting stretched out where you had woven in your ends. That's going to get stretched out too as you're blocking. So that's why I leave a tail. I weave in my ends, leave a tail, then block it. And then after it's dried and I've taken it off the blocking board, then I go and trim my end just down to the fabric. So that's my tip for weaving in ends on something like that. But something like a dishcloth, I usually just weave in a few times and then I call it good. Let's see. And then Lindsay says, I'm always afraid of my end coming out. I go through several stitches and then sometimes tie a knot so it won't be visible. How often do your ends come out? My ends most often do not. Where I notice that my ends might come out is if I'm using a really slippery yarn, something like a bamboo or cotton blend or something like that, a silk yarn, something slippery. That's where I'm more likely to see my ends coming out. And when that does happen, all I do is sometimes I'll just take you know, I'll take a tapestry needle or a yarn needle. And if I have that little end, I might just sort of, you know, give it a little stab so that it just goes back to the wrong side. Cause it's usually just like a little fuzzy little end, but really I don't have a problem. And as far as tying knots, you know, a lot of people don't like to tie knots in their knitting. I, in general, don't tie knots in my knitting, but, you know, there are no knitting police. So, you know, if you find that You like to tie a knot when you're weaving in your end, you go ahead and do that. If that's how, if that makes you feel like the end is secure, that is perfectly valid. Some people may tell you that, no, you should never put knots in your knitting, but I'm not going to tell you that, because knitting should make you happy. And if that is going to make you happy with your project at the end, then that's what you should do for your project. So that's it. So you would just follow the pattern, and then you would end up with this really nice dishcloth. So let me just go ahead now and switch back to my other camera. So there we go. That's it. I really hope that you enjoyed learning how to make this dishcloth with me. Again, don't forget to download that pattern so that you can knit one for yourself. And if you do decide to knit one for yourself, I really do hope that you'll share your project with us. So there's a couple ways that you can do that. You can share it in our Facebook group. We do have a Knitting Circle Facebook group, and it's a huge group. It's a very supportive group, and people are always just sharing whatever they're working on in there. And so you can join our Facebook group and just share what you're working on in there. Also, on our Knitting Circle website, we actually have a project gallery. And so if you go to the project gallery on the Knitting Circle website, you can share your photo there. And so we can see your progress there as well. And then sometimes when we do the Facebook Live Q&A sessions, we do show some of the pictures that have been shared on our project gallery, which is always so fun and so inspirational. So I really hope that you all enjoyed this Facebook Live today. You enjoyed learning along with me, and I will see you back here again in a couple weeks for our next one. I think you'll be really excited about our next project. I know that I am. So stay tuned. I will see you guys again soon. Happy knitting.